Okay, let's jump right in. We're talking about something today that, well, it really touches your daily work, especially if you're listening in from the Canadian Public
That's
Service.
right.
Cast your mind back, if you will, to the pandemic response, that
Mhm.
intensity.
Mm.
On one hand, you probably felt that surge, didn't you? When
Yeah.
programs like SEER and CEWS just appeared almost overnight.
Incredible speed, really. It showed government could be fast, adaptable, maybe even entrepreneurial when it absolutely had to be.
Right. Those moments really showed what's possible. They highlighted the dedication and skill that's already there in the system among you and your colleagues.
Absolutely. Deep wells of capacity, no question.
But then, alongside that speed, you also probably felt the flip side, the frustrations.
Oh, definitely.
Things like the passport renewal backlogs dragging on forever, the immigration delays, or, looking at the cost of something like the Arrive Can app and
Oh,
just thinking,
how did that happen? How did it get so complicated, so expensive?
exactly. And the source material we're digging into today suggests these things, the successes and the frustrations. They're not just random occurrences.
No, they're symptoms. Two sides of the same coin, really, pointing to a deeper, maybe more systemic challenge.
And that challenge is what people call state capacity. Our main source here is a recent paper from the Public Policy Forum, and the title kind of says it all, Incapacitated.
It's a striking title. And it defines state capacity pretty simply, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's basically the government's ability to actually do its job effectively.
That's the core of it. Can the state raise the money it needs? That's fiscal capacity. Can it maintain order, enforce rules fairly, deliver services? That's legal capacity, provide public goods.
And the key word there seems to be effectively.
Precisely. It's not about arguing for big government versus small government. The focus is shifting. It's about how well the government, whatever its size, is actually equipped and able to function. How competent is it?
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this idea using the source paper. We want to understand the specific challenges it lays out for Canada's state capacity, look at some of the proposed solutions, and maybe most importantly,
Talk about what this means for you, the people working inside the system, trying to make it work, and ultimately for the Canadians you serve.
it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
How this term, state capacity, which started in academic circles looking at like historical development,
Understanding why some countries got rich and others didn't.
how it's suddenly so relevant for a developed country like Canada today. Can you give us the bit of that background? Where did it come from?
Sure. Well, originally academics used it to figure out, what separated successful developing nations from less successful ones. They really zeroed in on a couple of core things.
Like what?
Primarily, the state's ability to tax people effectively, fiscal capacity, and its power to set and enforce rules and protect property rights reliably. That's the legal capacity piece.
So a government that could do those basic things well created a foundation.
Exactly. It provided the stability, the predictability needed for markets to develop, for investment to happen. It was seen as crucial for that great enrichment period, that massive economic takeoff starting a couple of centuries ago.
Okay, so effective government capability has deep roots. It's not just about modern bureaucracy. Canada's pretty good at collecting taxes, generally speaking. So is the issue somewhere else now?
Well, those core things are still vital, absolutely. But for developed countries like ours, the conversation is shifting. It's now more about how well the state can handle the sheer complexity of modern challenges.
And things feel incredibly complex right now.
They really do. People talk about a polycrisis. It's not just one big issue, is it? It's multiple huge challenges all hitting at once and interacting in messy ways. Well, you've got aging demographics, straining healthcare and pensions. You've got the huge, multifaceted task of climate change. You've got AI transforming everything. And then there's the whole geopolitical landscape, which feels less stable than it used to.
Yeah, those aren't exactly minor issues.
Yeah.
They demand pretty sophisticated responses from government, right? Often proactive ones.
Absolutely. And the source paper argues this is why the debate in Canada needs to move beyond just the size of government. Yes, spending is up. The public service workforce has grown.
But the real question is capacity, competence.
Exactly. Is the state actually equipped to execute effectively on the complex things we need it to do to navigate these crises? Can it deliver?
Okay, let's bring this right back to you, the listener, the public servant. Why should this matter to you personally, day to day? It can sound a bit abstract.
That's a really important question because thinking about state capacity is, I think, directly tied to your ability to actually do your job well, to make that difference you want to make.
How so?
Well, strengthening state capacity means making sure the resources you work with, the money, the people, the systems are actually used in the most impactful way. It's about tackling those big problems effectively. It's also fundamental for public trust, isn't it? Showing that the institutions you work for can deliver.
And I guess ultimately, it's about making sure government can actually turn good policy ideas into real results for Canadians. For a lot of people in public service, that drive to serve, to have a positive impact, that's why they're there.
So understanding state capacity is really about understanding how to unlock that potential, how to make the system work better so you can achieve more.
So where does Canada actually stand? The source does acknowledge strengths, right? We're not starting from zero.
Not at all. That's important context. Canada has a really strong foundation, a long tradition of an independent, professional, merit-based public service that's respected globally.
We have solid institutions.
Robust institutions, exactly. And Canadians generally have high expectations for accountability, for transparency. Canada often scores pretty well on international comparisons of public administration, like the INSIC index.
Okay.
But the source suggests our recent trajectory might show some areas needing attention, and the pandemic maybe threw some existing challenges into sharper relief.
They exposed some cracks, perhaps, or
Yeah.
exacerbated existing issues.
Precisely. The paper points to some structural trends and challenges, things that weren't necessarily new, but became much more visible or problematic under stress. And these impact our state capacity.
Okay, let's unpack those. What are the key challenges the paper identifies?
One of the big ones it talks about is what it calls the growing labyrinth of accountability and transparency rules.
Ah, that sounds familiar. I suspect many listeners feel that one. More process, more checks, more balances.
Yes. And the paper is careful to say the intentions are often good. Think of the Federal Accountability Act, passed after scandals. The goal was more oversight, preventing misuse of funds, good goals.
But the effect?
The cumulative effect, the paper argues, of adding layer upon layer of rules can actually end up disempowering individual officials.
How does that work? Makes people afraid to act.
It seems to foster a culture of risk aversion. Michael Vernick, the former clerk, is quoted on this. He talks about how when something goes wrong, the reflex is just to add another rule, another layer of oversight. He says, we tend to add and add and add, and it's much more difficult to strip them away. And this constant layering creates a risk of a chill.
A chill.
Yeah, where public servants become overly cautious. They might stick rigidly to the process, favor really small, incremental changes, rather than using their judgment or taking a necessary, calculated risk.
That must feel really constraining.
Yeah.
Like you can't use your own common sense sometimes because the process dictates otherwise.
It can, according to the source. It quotes Donald Savoy, the public administration scholar, quite starkly on this. He says all this oversight and reporting makes the machinery thicker, more risk-averse.
Thicker and more risk-averse.
And he uses this really potent image saying it creates a veritable army of public servants kept busy turning a crank not attached to anything.
Wow. Turning a crank not attached to anything. That hits hard. That captures that feeling of being incredibly busy, maybe, but not necessarily achieving much.
It reflects that frustration, I think, that the system's own complexity can sometimes get in the way of practical problem solving. It becomes about checking boxes, navigating internal hoops. And for you, the listener, working in this, the source stresses this isn't a criticism of your skills. It's a systemic thing that can actually stop you from using your skills effectively.
Like needing 5 approvals for a minor change or spending ages documenting something instead of doing it.
Exactly that kind of friction, which leads directly into another challenge, the paper flags. Outdated technologies and processes.
Okay, the IT systems, the paperwork.
Yes. The paper uses those really visible examples, the passport chaos, the immigration backlogs, the whole saga around the ArriveCan app's cost and development.
Those were things the public really felt directly. Big headlines.
They were, and they show how relying on old IT, on manual processes, just leads to really poor outcomes for people and businesses. It damages trust in government services, the very services you are trying your best to deliver. It just makes your job harder if the basic tools are broken or inefficient.
The paper also mentions regulatory issues.
Briefly, yes. It notes that while regulation is obviously crucial, sometimes a really strong emphasis on the precautionary principle in some areas can inadvertently slow down needed innovation or construction.
Things like housing, transit, energy projects.
Exactly. Even when basic safety is covered, the process itself can become an impediment. It's a tough balance to get right, obviously.
And what about the structure? Government is just so big. So many departments.
Which brings us to another major challenge. Insularity and, well, a lack of really effective coordination across those silos.
Silos, yeah, we hear that word a lot.
Because so many of the biggest issues we face now, climate change, reconciliation with indigenous peoples, economic growth, linking immigration levels to housing availability, they don't fit neatly into one department's box. They're cross-cutting files.
Right, so tackling the energy transition, for example, isn't just the job of Natural Resources Canada.
Oh, far from it. The source uses that as a perfect example. It lists off all the departments involved: environment, finance, global affairs, indigenous relations, innovation, transport, employment, plus regulators like the CER. And that's not even counting coordinating with provinces and territories. It's dozens of players.
Wow. Just managing that coordination must be a nightmare.
It's incredibly difficult. The structure, which is built around individual ministerial responsibility, can make it really hard to balance trade-offs between different goals, to see how different policies might clash, or even just to share essential information effectively across departments.
So this lack of coordination makes it harder to tackle the big, messy problems.
Much harder. It impacts how coherently government can actually act to get things done for Canadians.
The paper also touches on a couple of other related things quickly: consultants and procurement.
Yeah, they're mentioned almost as symptoms. A heavy reliance on consultants might sometimes signal gaps in internal expertise, or maybe rigid HR or procurement rules make it hard to mobilize internal teams quickly. And slow procurement, well, it just means getting the tools or services you need to do your job takes way too long.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. The source argues that all these things combined, the rules, the tech issues, the silos, the procurement delays, they add up to a kind of hidden opportunity cost.
That's such a crucial concept. It's not just that things are slow or frustrating. There's a real cost in terms of what doesn't get done or what doesn't get done as well as it could.
Meaning the Canadian state isn't reaching its full potential.
Exactly. The paper argues it's being impeded. And this means that the huge amount of skill, dedication, creativity, all that potential that exists within the public service, within you and your colleagues, isn't being fully utilized. It's being held back by these systemic issues.
So the cost is missed chances for better services, slower action on urgent problems, maybe less innovation, suboptimal outcomes for Canadians because the system itself is kind of getting in its own way. It's not enabling its people.
That's the argument. Canada might be slower to adapt, less effective at building things, less good at delivering seamless services, because the machinery itself is, as you say, a bit gummed up.
Okay, so if those are the challenges creating this opportunity cost, the big question is, what can we do about it? How can Canada boost its state capacity? What does the source suggest?
Right. The paper doesn't claim to have all the answers. It's not a complete reform blueprint. But it does propose 4 key areas where changes could make a real difference. And they're framed very much as ways to make the system work better for you and ultimately for the public.
All right, let's hear them. What are the ideas?
Okay, first, revisiting those accountability and transparency rules. The idea isn't to get rid of accountability that's essential. It's about finding a better balance.
A balance that maybe empowers officials more? Reduces that risk aversion.
Exactly. Allows you to use your professional judgment and discretion more without feeling paralyzed by the fear of breaking some obscure rule. The paper admits there are trade-offs, but suggests the current balance might be costing too much in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. It's about fostering more trust in the professionalism within the service.
That sounds like a big cultural shift. Trusting people to make good calls, rather than just follow process. Imagine feeling you could sign off on something based on your expertise, not needing 6 levels of approval.
It would be significant. The second idea is expanding interchange programs, like Interchange Canada, where people move temporarily between government and the private or nonprofit sectors.
Yeah, those are often seen as good for individual career development.
They are. But the source argues we should think much bigger. Scale them up massively, maybe from hundreds a year to thousands, looking at examples in places like the UK or Australia. And the purpose should be broader than just development. It's about deliberately bringing in fresh perspectives, different types of expertise, new ideas into government, and just as importantly, sending public servants out to experience different ways of working and bring those insights back.
So actively fighting that insularity we talked about.
Precisely. Combating groupthink, challenging the Ottawa bubble. The paper even floats bringing back something like the old $1 a year idea for specific projects.
Really? getting experts in for short stints.
Yeah, maybe leveraging highly experienced people, perhaps recently retired professionals, for focused assignments, possibly with more flexible hiring rules, to inject that external knowledge right where it's needed on problems you might be wrestling with.
Interesting. Definitely thinking outside the box on talent. What's number 3?
Third is the idea of creating new public institutions. Now, this isn't just about making government bigger. It's about setting up small, maybe experimental agencies designed to operate differently.
Like test labs for government innovation.
Kind of. Think about DARPA in the U.S., the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, often credited with breakthroughs like the internet. The idea is maybe we need a Canadian version, a CARPA perhaps, as suggested in other PPF work.
And these would have different rules?
Potentially. They might get exemptions from some standard HR or Treasury Board rules, allowing them to try different ways of managing projects, taking risks, procuring things faster, focusing purely on achieving ambitious outcomes. If they succeed, they could become models for reform elsewhere in the system.
So, incubator spaces for better government practices. Okay, what's the fourth and final idea?
The fourth one is about strengthening centralized policy and oversight capacity. This one is maybe the most controversial.
Because it sounds like more power to the center. PMO and PCO. People worry about that.
They do, and the source acknowledges those legitimate concerns about centralization and the influence of unelected staff. There are definite trade-offs to consider. But the argument here is that if you want to effectively coordinate those really complex horizontal files we discussed,
Like the energy transition or reconciliation or linking immigration and housing.
exactly, things that involve multiple departments, often with competing priorities. The argument is you need stronger, more institutionalized capacity at the center in PCO, primarily to drive coordination, oversee implementation, and make sure everyone is pulling in the same direction.
Like a central command center for big priorities.
Sort of. The source mentions the U.S. National Economic Council as one possible model, a body set up specifically to coordinate economic policy across departments. Something similar, or just enhanced capacity here, could help embed a more consistent whole-of-government approach, making sure big policy pushes are actually delivered effectively for Canadians. And this also applies to strengthening how we work between governments, federal, provincial, municipal, on shared challenges.
Okay, stepping back from the 4 proposals, what's the big takeaway here? What does this whole conversation about state capacity really boil down to for you, our listener, working in the public service?
Well, connecting the dots, this isn't really about pointing fingers or criticizing effort. It's fundamentally about acknowledging the incredible potential that exists within the Canadian public service within you and figuring out how to make sure the system itself is set up to succeed in today's really complex world.
So it's about finding those systemic roadblocks, the things that cause those daily frustrations maybe, and figuring out how to clear them away so government can actually serve the public better.
That's the heart of it. These are tough conversations for sure. They involve tricky trade-offs like balancing accountability with empowerment or central coordination with letting departments run their files.
But necessary conversations.
The source argues they're absolutely essential if Canada wants to adapt and thrive. It's about unleashing the potential that's already there inside the system.
The paper ends on a really interesting note. It says that historically, the quality of Canada's public service has been a major competitive advantage for us globally.
It has been. And looking forward, maintaining that, even enhancing it, feels pretty critical for our future resilience and success, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to reflect on. Given these challenges, given the complexity, how can you, in your role, contribute to making sure Canada not only holds on to that advantage, but actually strengthens its state capacity? How can we collectively ensure we're delivering the best possible outcomes for Canadians in the years to come? It's a huge question, but hopefully this deep dive gives some food for thought.